Okay, so tonight we're going to pick up where we left off on plan rendering in Photoshop and focus instead on visual simulations. So what a visual simulation is it's taking an image of a place as it currently exists and overlaying images and kind of implementing, showing what the implemented design would look like. And a lot of times we use these for public outreach. They're kind of a quick, easy way to get a perspective view where you feel like you're in the space. And they're a lot less time consuming and therefore expensive to clients to evaluate a space and to show the public. So I am in my plan, I'm taking the section of the park where there's just a traditional ribbon drain that is not treating any stormwater. It then disperses out to a natural system. And I've got the concept where I'm trying to slow the water down with a series of check dams, use more native plant material, and then also create some human use spaces along this journey of stormwater. And so if I look at the park site to begin with, this is what it looks like. Very much a 1970s type of installation. Again, no pre-treatment, lots of fertilizers and pesticides running off from that lawn and going directly into natural systems. And so after the visual simulation, where I've dropped in my design elements, it's going to look like this, or at least this is what I'm proposing. So I've got some native wildflower meadows, which is still a grassy use area, just not a formal lawn. You can see the series of check dams migrating down the stream with some bioswale type plantings that are going to work with the soil to clean up that water and use some of the extra nitrogen that might be generated from growing horticultural plants, and then some riparian trees that might have existed in this area naturally. So to get from this image to this image, we have to open up a new canvas. So that's the first order. So I'm going to go to my file and say new. And then I'm going to look over here and put my canvas settings in. So I've decided that I want to make this about an 11 by 17 inch canvas in landscape format. So 17 inches wide, 11 inches high. You'll notice that there are many units you can set through. I found that Photoshop tends to default to pixels until you use it a few times, then it learns in the US anyway to make set the kind of know that you might want to use inches. There's certainly metric metric units in there also. But I'm going to stick with inches. I've got my width at 17 inches wide by 11 inches high. I want a 300 pixels per inch resolution. I have maintained RGB color. That's because I'm going to be pulling images off the internet to drop in, and they're going to be coded with RGB color. So there's other choices for the type of color. We use RGB if we know we're going to be presenting things digitally, and RGB kind of is, it blends with the lighting of a monitor for the colors. If we know we're going to be sending things out to a print shop, then we would use CMYK color. The problem with using CMYK color is that if I'm pulling things off the internet, I have to change this color mode for everything I try and drag into my rendering. So I'm just going to make it easy on myself and stay with RGB color. I like to have a white background, but you could have a black background, a transparent background, so a number of choices. And then I don't manage my color and I have square pixels. So I'm going to hit create, and now I've got my canvas. So the first thing I want to do is adjust my background image of the site before I drag it in. And you can see I've got my rulers on, and this is pretty typical of cell phone pictures. When you bring them in, they tend to be very large pictures with very low resolution. So I want to change this image to make it a smaller image with a higher resolution. So I've got my background image selected. I'm going to go over to image, I'm going to hit image size, and it's going to give me some options. So you can see the original size of this picture that I took on my phone is 56 inches by 42 inches with a 72 inch pixels per inch resolution. So I'm going to bring that down maybe to 16 by about 12. Okay, we'll try 16 by 12. And then I'm going to increase the resolution 300 and hit OK. And you can see it's now reduced the image. You can see my rulers are going up to about a much smaller amount. And now I'm going to slide this over onto my canvas. And then I'm kind of done with this picture. Nope, I don't want, I don't need, I'm not going to change it. I'll leave it big. And then I can kind of center this. I can kind of play with it. Maybe I don't want quite as much sky. Maybe I want it a little bit smaller. So Control T is how I transform the size. So I can nudge it down. Now you can see mine defaults, or if I don't hit Shift, if I just try and move it, it skews it. But I don't want to do that. I want Control T. And on my keyboard, I have to hold Shift to keep the properties constrained so that it doesn't skew it when I don't want it to. So I'm just going to kind of make it maybe fit this a little bit better. It'll still be a little bit big. I don't necessarily need the whole thing, but kind of balance the skyline and the swale. So that's kind of fitting in there nicely. Nudge it over a couple clicks. And now I'm going to save as on my computer. Name it something you need. So now I've got it saved as a PSD format. That's going to save all of my layer information. That is considered a native file. The other format that saves all the layer information is a PDF with layers. So you have a couple options. I tend to like to work in the .psd file. That is the Photoshop native file. So I'm going to save it. Yes, that's fine. You can maximize. So I've got my background in. And now what I want to do is I want to open up some images that I want to clip out so that I can start dropping this in. So I'm going to start with the tree. Let's open that up. This is just something I've pulled off the internet. Let's just drag and grab the bar, and so it doesn't stack on the tabs if you don't like that. And I've selected my 4-way move arrow. And now I'm just going to drag my tree over onto my plan. Now it's a little bit small. It's because it's off the internet. It's probably a low resolution. I'm going to take that layer with the tree over here and Control T it. I'm going to hit Shift to make it a little bit bigger so I can flip it out a little bit easier. Ideally, if I can find a tree that has an all blue background, sometimes that can be an easy way to clip a tree out and use it in your simulation. But for this, I'll have to do a couple different types of selection and removing pieces. So I like this polygonal lasso tool. This is not the default tool settings. If you've just started Photoshop on, they'll have to click on this little arrow in the corner, and you can see the different types of lasso tools. I tend to like this one. That's just the one that I've used. And I'm going to clip some of this information that I don't need. So I don't need this extra tree. Get rid of that. And once I select it, you see the little marching ants border. And that's tell me what is selected. So I can either go into here and select cut and get rid of that piece. The other way I can cut things out is by hitting a shortcut of Control X. So I'll do that this time, Control X, remove those extra pieces too. I'm just kind of getting rid of some of the area I don't need. Some of this. You can see I've got a street light in this one. So I'm going to have to kind of get some of that information out of the tree canopy because that's not part of my design. So the other selection tool that I like that can save a lot of time is the magic wand tool. So on this one, I'm going to go back to this lasso tool because I just noticed that the edges of my clipping look pretty hard. So I want to soften the edges when I clip. So this is with 0 pixel feathering. I'm actually going to go up with this lasso tool and I'm going to maybe say a 2 pixel feathering and see how that looks. Now I'm just going to clip a little area and see what 2 pixels look like for feathering. Same thing, I'm making a little loop and selecting an area and I'm hitting my control X. Let's zoom in. You see how that line's just a little bit blurred? That's kind of what I'm looking for. When I have a very hard edge like this, it can look very fake when you're assembling photographs. So if you follow some famous people and you want to check if they're editing their photos before they post on social media, sometimes these hard edges are the giveaway. Now I'm going back to this magic wand tool. It's going to remember that feathering that I set up on any of these other selection tools. Here's a rectangular tool. I'm going to go ahead and set up the 2 pixels on that too. And then I'm going to go back to this magic wand tool. Again, if you don't see this popping up, you can click on the corner and open up these other tools that are nested in that icon or that selection 4 down. And now when I select this area, it's going to identify everything that is that color of blue. So you can see it's doing a lot of the work trimming for me. So it's selected. I can see my marching ants border. I'm going to hit Control X. And I've gotten rid of a lot of the background. I can go in, and this is why I like a blue background, is you can kind of just then kind of select these little blue areas and thin this out and out that tree pretty quickly and in a way that looks naturalistic without all of the trimming that a polygonal lasso will require for the lower half of the tree, as you will see. So it's grabbing, when I select on blue, it's grabbing everything around it that's close to that blue color. All right. Some other big areas. If I want to not be distracted by the background, I can simply turn that off so I can see the blue a little bit more clearly. Again, I always have my layers palette open. And if you don't have your layers showing, you can always go to Window, and there's all these different toolbars, but definitely have your layers on. That's a key piece of managing Photoshop. Being on the right layer. Usually if you're having a problem in Photoshop, it's because you're on the wrong layer. I'm going to get some of this blue out. So I've zoomed in with my magnifying glass. And if I want to zoom out, I have to hit Alt. And you can see how it turns to a minus sign. And I'm clicking and holding Alt, and then it'll allow me to zoom out. Can play around with that. I'm going to go back to my magic wand and grab some of these bigger blue pieces here. Again, just hitting Control X to get rid of some of the blue. I accidentally select something, it's Control Z to back out of it. I got a little bit of blue here. Get this one, Control X. And now I've got to kind of clip out these buildings and backgrounds and other trees. So I'm going to take my polygonal lasso and I'm just going to start clipping things out. I find that if I flip out sections, it generally works better. Sometimes you can click so many points and then it'll snap back onto itself. I've learned the hard way not get over anxious and just clip out small sections. Just going along the trunk here. Try to clip out that building behind and things that are not part of that tree. And I don't have to be exact, just trying to find the edge of it. Okay, that one can come up along here. A little bit more. Background tree to this one. It's kind of merging together. I'm going to probably clean this up a little bit. I can see this branch is coming. So two trees of the same type brought together. So great. So I've got this little bit of light. Maybe I want to get rid of that. When I've clipped out the tree behind it, it took most of it away. But I definitely want to show you how you might fix that in your rendering. So you can use this tool called a clone stamp tool. Again, if you don't see this pop up in your bar, just click on the corner and you'll have a couple different tools to choose from. So we're going to choose the clone stamp tool, and then I'm going to go to my brushes, my paintbrush, and I'm going to, no tools. Okay, I am going to select a hard round brush, and maybe I'm going to make it about that big. That's about right. That fits in there nice. You can see I get a little preview down there. And I'm going to click out of that. And I'm going to keep it at full opacity, but if I wanted to brush something with a reduced opacity, I could adjust it there. And then when I go back to the clone stamp tool, it's probably going to default to my brushes. Looks like it's got default to the last time I used it. I decided I wanted about 42. That seems about the right size. And the way that I use this is first I hover over the area that I want to copy. So maybe these leaves look pretty good. And then I select Alt, and you see this little target. And so that's what it's copying. And then I let go and I move over to the area that I want to make it look the same. And I can just, why can't you use my clone? Okay, it wants me to do that again. Click. I have to select Alt and actually click it. And then I can kind of clone it and get rid of that little light. Just like that. And magic, it has disappeared. So now I have a tree symbol that I can, one little area to clip over here, but pretty close to having a tree symbol that I can then enlarge and make larger, smaller, and scatter around my site in accordance with my plan. So I'm going to use my diagonal lasso tool, try and get rid of this little roof line here. Okay, Control X. I might take some of this out. And it's kind of weird right here, so I'm probably going to fix this a little bit and just trim some of this off, make it look a little less strange over there. Got a tree. Trees aren't perfectly symmetrical. I'm going to save it. I'm going to turn my background back on, zoom out a little bit, and you can kind of see it kind of can fit in there. Set that off to the side for a little bit. And then I might trim a couple boulders out. So now I'm going to open up some of my samples. Let's see. Which boulders do I like? Let's see what these look like. I'm not liking that picture as much. Close that. Open my other boulder picture. There it is. So I'm going to bring this over and trim a couple boulders out so I can have them for my design. There are quite a few boulders in my design. Zoom in here. Am I going to duplicate a layer? So I right click on it and I hit duplicate layer, and then I'm going to turn one off. And then I'm going to clip out some boulders. I'm going to use my polygonal lasso tool. I've got my feather at 2 pixels, and this looks like kind of a nice boulder. I'm going to clip this guy out. Okay. Now, if I select Control X, what happens? X. Get back on the layer that I'm on. Let's see. I'm going to go back in history. Got my polygonal lasso. So history, you can go forwards and backwards for about 10 steps. So I was on the wrong layer. As I said, that is a challenge to Photoshop. I've got my layer 3 is copied. So my boulder layer is copied and turned off. And then I wanted to be on the active layer 3. And if I select my rock and then I cut it, so I can go edit, cut, you can see I've just deleted the rock that I wanted to save. So I don't want to do that. I'm going to go back in history to my polygonal lasso and restore my rock. And then I'm going to hit select inverse. And so if I zoom out, what you'll see is it's selected the entire boundary. It's taken the selection that I've created, and it's going to erase everything between this outer boundary and the boulder that I selected. So now when I hit Control X and I'm on the right layer, it takes away everything but that one boulder. So that's another trick of clipping things out. So I've got now one boulder here. I'm going to kind of move this off to the side. And I'm going to turn on this saved layer. And I'm going to clip out yet another boulder. Which boulder do I want? This is kind of an interesting one. So I'm going to try this one. Okay, and then select inverse to select everything but that boulder, and Control X. And now I've got a couple boulders. Okay. And then I'm going to clip out a couple more things. Maybe this little gathering area be a good one. Pull that over. Yeah. Close this. Make it a little bit bigger so I can see it, or I could zoom in, whatever is to your liking. I'm going to use my polygonal lasso tool once again, and I'm going to cut this whole thing out. just like I did with the tree. That rock in maybe. So you can tell this is a time-consuming process. So definitely allocate a bit of time to cut all these pieces out for reassembly. So I'm trying to close it right here, and I'm looking for that little circle to pop up right there. All right, so now got my seating area out here, all these little pieces, seating. I like to label things. It just, once you get going, you might have 40 or 50 layers. So if you have them labeled, it's a lot easier to find what you're trying to move. So when I look at my rendering, I'm looking at a view from really standing about right here, probably standing on the sidewalk and looking down this way. So this round little seat wall area is right in my line of view off to the right. It is below this little walkway here. So I'm going to kind of set that in that location, down low along the water. It is below the walkway. That doesn't look like a bad size. I'm going to play around with it a little bit. Maybe it's a little bit smaller, like that. For now is a good start. Once I get people in, then I can scale it up or down a little bit. I've got my, my little gathering area. I've got a little check dam that's right in front of this area. I also have one right in my line of sight if I go back to my rendering. So I'm looking at this and I see this first check dam, and then there's this second check dam here where this seating area is. So now I'm going to build those up. Always save. Always a good idea with Photoshop because it can crash readily. And I'm going to take this boulder. This is my number 1 boulder. And I'm going to create a little check dam right along here. So in the foreground, it's going to be a bit larger. So I'm going to make it like that. It's even a little bit larger than that. And then boulder 2. Same thing. I'm going to bring that forward and make it a little bit larger. Like that. And then I'm actually going to save these 2 boulders. I'm going to create a copy because I'm going to repeat them further down the slope and I'll have to change their size. So I can right click on it, duplicate layer, boulder 1 copy, and I'm just going to turn it off for now. I'm going to do the same thing with boulder 2. Duplicate layer, boulder 2 copy. Okay, turn it off now. So now I have unaltered versions that I can play with. So the ones that are on, I can move around. I can change the layer of, I want this big one maybe in front of that little one, right? So it's kind of like creating this little check dam area. Maybe I want to have a few of these boulders. So if I want to add more of them, I can select it. So I can take this is another selection tool. It's a rectangular selection. Again, if you don't see it, you can go into the little palette that is tied with that button. And so I've created my rectangular marquee. And if I go back to my move tool, I can move up and down and I kind of grab that boulder. It's stuck onto that edge of that image. And now if I want to repeat that boulder, make duplicate copies on the same layer, what I do is you can see my little arrow. I'm on move tool right now. And if I select Alt, it creates this little double arrow. And if I hold Alt down and I click and I drag it, it's going to repeat. It's going to copy that boulder. So I'm going to make a few of those along here for my check dam. Right? If I wanted to make it look different, I could Control T with the one I've selected. I could flip it horizontal, flip it vertically. That looks strange because the shadow's not right. But I could play around with, just moving it like that so that they look a little bit different. Control D is it's enter, and then Control D to deselect it. I've got a little line of boulders that look like little soldiers, and now I want to grab my other boulder, my first boulder, and kind of repeat that. I'm going to select it with my rectangular tool, nudge it, grab that boulder. Then I can see my arrow when I select Alt. It's going to have a double arrow. That means I'm ready to duplicate. So as soon as I click and drag, I've got now a couple. So I can play around with this. I could Control T and flip this horizontally if I want it to look a little different, right? I can create more. I want something like that. Maybe here, Control T, kind of flipping it back and forth to look a little more naturalistic, right? Or maybe I'm going to go back to Boulder 2 and grab a couple of those. Oh, if I do that, you can see I picked up both pieces of boulder because they're too close together. So I'm going to select with my polygonal lasso and then nudge it up. And that's going to grab just that one. So maybe I want to pull some off here and I want them to be a bit smaller. Control T, and I can actually reduce the size of this, but it's all going to be on the same layer. And then I want to duplicate it, right? I can add a few things. Like for it to be in front, that's not going to necessarily happen because of the way I have my layers set up. But you can make multiple layers and start layering this between different layers of rock. So ideally, I would have a third layer and put these small ones in front to start making it look naturalistic. But for the sake of time, I'm not going to do that tonight. Control D. So now I've got one little check dam of boulders, and I'm going to save it. And then I can take my copied boulders. Remember, I have those. Copy one. I'm selecting that copy layer, and I'm going to bring it back over here. Now it's too big for this area. I'm going to reduce it down, and I'm going to make it kind of in scale with where this is lying. So maybe it's about half the size. My seating area, I'm going to actually move it a little bit further back. A little more room. Maybe something like that. Okay. And then I got my little boulder here. And I'm going to maybe make it a little bit smaller even. So I move that back a little bit. And maybe that boulder is going to go in front of my seating. So it's kind of layered that way. I'm going to duplicate that boulder on the same layer. I did that by doing my selection tool, hitting move, and now I want to copy it. I am on the move tool with this grabbed on to my boulder, and I've got the double arrow, and like I know my seat wall ends with a boulder at the end. So I'm going to add one there. I'm going to add a couple in here. Make them a little second check dam over here. Control V. I've got my other boulder copy, my smaller boulder. Here's my small copy that I've turned on. I'm going to grab it here. I'm going to make it much smaller. Now, way back there, maybe something like that. I actually want that boulder on top of the other one because it's smaller. And that's okay. Let me make it a little bit smaller. And then I want to duplicate that boulder. One here, one here. Maybe I want a really small one right there. I can kind of play with the size on the same layer. All right. I've got a second check dam, a little bit further downstream now in my seating area. For my trees, I'm just going to kind of turn this off out of the way, and I'm going to focus on the water course. So here's my tree layer. So I'm going to label it as my tree species and just turn it off for now. Now I'm going to do some little ponding because the concept is to have this water kind of back up on these check dams, and that allows infiltration. They would remove these swales and then create an area to infiltrate and improve water quality. So I found this little image online of this pond, and I liked the kind of boulder edge to it and some of the rocks. So I'm going to go ahead and bring that into my drawing. And I'm going to see how I can play with that to make that pond-like effect. So let's say pond. All right, got that. Obviously, it's very square, and I don't necessarily want it super square, but I like these rocks around it. So I'm just going to kind of carefully trim and make this a little more naturalistic. Start with. The other thing I want to do is I want to flatten it out a little bit. This is a little bit deeper than I envision for my area. So I'm going to duplicate this, duplicate layer, and save one because I'm going to be playing with it. And I think I'm first going to start with this one back here. So what I can do is a Control P, that's the control transform. And if I right click, I can start seeing this skew and distort that allows me to grab multiple points and adjust it. So I can actually start to kind of flatten out this view and adjust it to fit my drawing. I could make it a little wider. And so depending on whether you're using distort or skew, you can kind of play around with what looks right to your setting. Tuck it under here. This one's pretty big. I'm going to make it a little bit smaller, but I like the way it's kind of now sitting and flattening out a little bit. So I just want a little pond of water there. I'm going to actually bring those below my boulders and play with the placement of it so that it looks kind of a little bit more naturalistic. Right, so kind of got that going on as one check dam ponding area. I'm going to save that. Turn on my pond copy here and zoom out. The other zoom out. And I want to also lay that along the foreground. Now I got to make it a bit bigger. Size up a little bit. Control T here. And move it down, and I'm going to kind of flatten it out again with that. Well, let's try skew this time. So I'm bringing those edges and making it a little bit flatter. I might make it a little bit wider. Okay. Really just giving myself an effect of this kind of ponding. And I flatten that drawing out. And I'm going to hit enter. And I'm going to tuck it underneath my boulders so that I start having this little kind of edge to it. And I know I'm going to fill some of my area in with planting because I know that that's part of my concept, right? To have these little bands of planting alongside these little ponding areas. So that's looking pretty good to me. I've got my first check dam, my second check dam. I almost think this needs to go back a little bit, this whole group of the boulders and the pond. So I've selected all three of them by clicking on them and holding Shift, I believe. Do that again, just like you would if you were in a Word document. I've got this kind of group, and I'm going to nudge them back a little bit further. Okay. And nudges right nicely over along here. And then this boulder's now floating up a little bit higher than I like. So I'm going to unselect just to the one, find that boulder. So it's the other one. Here. And I'm going to drop that one down a little bit. Get it back in position adjacent to my seat wall. Set in the ground a little bit. Better. All right. So a couple. That seems about right. All right, so now I want to maybe I'll add my trees now. Here's my tree. I'm going to turn that on. If I look at my rendering around this area, I've got a few different sycamores. So I'm going to go to my demo, and this is it's not a bad size for this location. I've got two sycamores on this side of the little channel. So I can duplicate and have individual trees, or I can drag and copy them like I showed you with the boulders. In this case, maybe I'm going to have a couple trees. Great. If I want to reverse one of them, I can do a Control T and flip horizontal, and you can kind of see it kind of makes them look enough different that you don't really notice them. Checking my schedule, I can see here's my little seat wall. I've got two trees behind it on this side and then one tree over here. So I'm going to duplicate this again. Duplicate layer. Okay. Now I've got another tree, and I'm going to bring that duplicated layer over around in here. And so I've got my three sycamore trees defining that edge. Save. Now I also have a sycamore tree in the foreground. So if I look at my rendering, I'm standing right here. I've got one behind just at the edge of this little check dam, and then one about kind of where I'm standing. So I can drop those in too. And so the way that I do that is I might um, create a copy of one of these. So I'm going to duplicate that layer. Okay. And I'm going to bring it forward. I'm going to put it about where I think it should be. So I could make this almost a foreground framing and make this tree really, really big and have it kind of float off the edge. That's what I did in the example I showed you. See how big I'm making that tree? Because I want it to be like you're looking right under the canopy in this simulation. It's going to hide this kind of hard edge to my drawing too a little bit. And I'll keep it off the edge. There's one. And then I'm going to go back to this other one. Okay, layer. Okay. And then I'm going to bring one of them kind of by here. And this again is going to be a much bigger tree, right? Because it's closer to us. So it's in perspective. It's going to be a big monster tree, not quite as big as this one, but not too much smaller. This one down just to get rid of that root ball there. And then this one is going to get a little bit bigger yet again. About where those trees are, maybe something like that. Save. So I've got my trees placed. That was quick and easy. So now I want to work on clipping out some wetland plants. The other thing I can do is I found a grassy meadow background that I used to kind of remove the lawn. So actually let's do that item first. I'm going to do open. Here's my California grassland. Let's see, I have a couple of them in here. Open. This was the one I ended up using earlier. So it's kind of the effect of the meadow that I like, and I'm going to play around with this a little bit to get it to drop into the background. So it's got a similar slope, if you can see here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to drag it over into this drawing, close this one. I'm going to put this on top of my picture, and I'm going to make it really large. Yeah, that's working. You can see the slope going the wrong way. So I'm going to Control T, and I'm going to flip it, rotate, flip horizontal. So now try and bring it up. I can kind of keep an eye on the background where I have kind of the street has a slope beyond it, kind of reminded me of this site actually. So I'm going to turn this off for a minute. So you can see there's kind of a slope with a street along here, and there's a high rise and it comes down low in here. So this picture is similar in that it's got a slope and it's got this kind of runnel, but the runnel's not aligned with this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this over and get this runnel more in alignment with where my runnel is here. Right, so it's kind of like that, and there's my street. So I've got one side of it. I actually want my pond. Let's see, I want this to be, yeah, I'm gonna do some planting there, so that'll cover that edge up. I'm gonna turn my trees off for a minute so I can see what I'm doing. All right, and I like this kind of line along here because it's not all that different. That one. Than what I have here. So I'm kind of aligning it a little bit, bringing that swale around. It's following the pattern of the swale. I've got a slope that's very similar. So one of the things I'm going to do is trim some of this. Right. I'm playing with this slope, trying to get this grassland and this swale to line up. So it's kind of meandering down. Got this slope with kind of cars. I've got a little bit more of a rise here. I'm going to kind of distort this, I think, a little bit. Stretch it down. So it covers the bottom of my rendering. Really just trying to cover the grass. All right. So that's pretty good. It's starting to track the approximate line of the swale in the background, about the right size. I've kind of clipped things out. One of the things I can do is I can flip this. I can duplicate it. Duplicate my layer. Okay. And then I can bring it over. See, and I can flip it. So now I have this kind of other side that I can play with. Right, and kind of match some of this up. You can see about right here is where the slopes kind of meet together. So I'm trying to make those slopes work together. Okay. And you can see I've got this line now, right, where it's not looking the same, but I can fix that with my clone tool. So now I'm probably going to merge these together and create one layer. I've selected both and I'm going to merge the layers, and now I've got one layer. Oh, what happened there? Go back to this. So I want these two layers, and nope. All right. So I've got this kind of hump here that I'm going to work with the clone tool. So I'm going to go ahead and merge these two grassland together. I had the wrong two merged before. Now if I turn it off, you can see this. And so I'm going to kind of clean up this edge and just kind of clip out along here. And kind of see the cars and the trees that are part of the slope. I'm going to kind of take a look at this layer. I'm going to turn this off. And I can see over here, I want to show the edge of this sidewalk and probably these trees. I'm going to select them. All right. I'm going to turn on this layer again and kind of start to reveal some of that. And so I'm kind of clipping out some of the pieces that I don't necessarily need or want. Take that out. Right. And I do kind of like this slope. So I'm going to clone some of that. I'm going to reduce this amount over here so I can see that street edge. Because you could change the grade a little bit, make it a little bit more humping up and having that stream course go behind this kind of elevated point. So I'm kind of liking the contours a little bit here. There's a little bit of back and forth that go along with this. And again, if you cut too much, you can always go back in time and erase it. That didn't select much. All right, so I want to kind of blend this layer now, and I use my clone tool to do that. So I can see my clone tool is pretty small at this point, and I'm going to make that a bit larger now. Adjusting the size of it. It's looking okay. Let's see, maybe even bigger. All right, there's that. Okay, and I really like this area, the look of this off in the distance. So I can kind of start to blend those areas in the background and merge these kind of two pieces. So I'm almost kind of drawing in the wetland that or grassland area that I want. Same over here. I can soften this line between. A lot of this is going to get covered with my planting. So now I'm kind of liking the background of that. I have some trees in the background and I would work on softening that. I'm not going to do that for this session because we'll be here for hours. But I'm liking the way the grassland looks. I've got my little areas of ponding, the first couple of them. There's another one that happens, a couple more that happen down here. I'm going to focus on this front area just so you guys get an idea of how these visual simulations work. If I wanted to, I could go into my pond copies. So here's my pond and use the same clone tool. Now it's way too big, so I got to make it smaller. Maybe down to this, yes. Okay, that's looking like a good size. And if I want to copy this, I can create some more patterns where this is coming down. Sometimes it's a slow process because you're cloning small sections. That. Right? Trying to define that stream channel a little bit. And then I'm going to fill some in with wetland plants. Save this, open. Open. So I've got some native iris, and I'm going to drag that into my plan. And I'm going to clip this guy out. Right all the way on top, so I can see what I'm doing. Zoom in a bit. Come on. Too busy with my clipping. To look a little naturalistic on the edge. Okay. So I'll lift my iris. I'm going to duplicate it. Save one of my layers. I am going to take this one that I have active and move it around and reduce the size down a little bit. And I'm going to add it to my composition. And duplicate it just like I did with the trees and give myself a couple more along these edges. All right, kind of edging this space. Okay. Turn my iris back on, my saved one. This one I'm going to make even smaller. I'm going to be off in the distance over here, even a little bit smaller than that. Nice right there. The okay. Put that. Okay. And I want that iris kind of, I don't want it in front of those boulders. Oh, want it in front of the pond though. Pond up there. Oh, pond goes here. Ah, it's the wrong pond. This pond. I want it in front of the little my soft wetland planting. I want that in front of the boulders. So, not those boulders, these boulders, these boulders. So a lot of this is playing with kind of layers. Not that boulder. And could put the seating down here. So it starts to be layered. So it's starting to look like the design. And so I have a couple different types of planting. I'm not going to show you both types, but you can kind of get the gist of how you start to plug these along. I've got my little walkway here, got my trees in. I can turn those back on. So it's starting to look a bit like the design. One of the other things I want to do is drop in people. Let's see if I can find my Photoshop. My people. So I've got these people clipped out. You clip them out the same way that you would clip out a tree. On this, you can see all the layers, and each person's on a different layer. And so if I zoom in, I can show you one trick to figure out which layer they're on. So say I want these two people walking, I can right click on it. Oh, maybe not. Go to move, right click. It tells me it's layer 20 for this person and layer 19. And so I can go look along here and find my layer 19 and 20. Here they are. I've highlighted them. And I want to drag them into this composition. So I'm going to hold my shift because I've got two layers selected and drag them in. I can only dragged one lady in. Drag this one in. See if we can drag her in. All right. So she is now buried on our little area. Let's find where she went. Hiding behind other areas. I'm going to pull them up here. And I'm going to put them on my walkway up here to kind of activate this space. And then once I have people in, I can kind of start to scale things a little bit better too. So you can see that they're walking down this pathway. They're not placed too badly, but look at their size in comparison to this trash can. So these are giant people, and I want to bring them down in scale. The trash can's probably 3 feet high. Assume my tallest person might be 6 feet high. So these people should be about twice what that trash can is if they were standing at the same level. So that's about right. So I can put them on the little walking path. They're getting their after work exercise in. So I've got someone in my background. Always important to put people. That's going to help you check your scale. Let's see if I find where my people are again. Tuck them away. My other people. Let's see who else I want to pull into my rendering here. Someone who looks like they're somebody who's looking out into nature. Well, maybe this guy. See what he's doing. He's layer 34. I'm going to highlight him and drag him into my drawing. Right, so he's kind of hanging out. I think we're done with this for now. All right, mister. I'm going to put him in this drawing. I'm going to flip him. Control P. I'm going to flip him horizontal so that he's actually looking at maybe a bird or something. If I look at a seat wall, it's about 18 inches high. So I think he needs to get a little bit taller. He's a little bit too short for that seat wall. So I'm gonna, that's probably a little bit too big. A little smaller than that. Enter. If I've got him standing at the base, that's probably needs to be a little bit. That's probably about right. He's kind of standing. Maybe he sees a bird. I can even add a bird in if I wanted to. He's bird watching. So that's the basics of visual simulation. Obviously, on the one that I prepared earlier that I showed you, I have some different plants in there. I've developed the background, but you kind of get a gist of how these come together and can really, show those what your design is really like, what it's like to be in that space. And it's a pretty powerful tool to convey to clients and the general public why your design really improves the space. So we'll go back to the one that I originally did. So again, park rendering, and then here's the visual simulation that I worked on earlier. So you can kind of see this idea of the check dams working their way down. I obviously spent a little bit more time on that background and getting it to fit in a little bit better. But I'm hoping this gives you the skills that you need to complete some of your landscape architecture classes and practice these, because these can be very impressive in a portfolio. All right, that's enough for tonight. Thanks, everyone.